In John 10:11 it says, I am the good shepherd. Now, we really can't relate well to shepherds because most of us weren't raised on a farm, and most of us don't really understand shepherds. We have a lot of cattle in America, but there are a few areas only that have sheep. And if you go back and you study the Old Testament and you study the history of in the area around Israel, you find that shepherds sometimes were not the owners of the sheep. And sometimes in the Bible it talks about hirelings. And a lot of the times when I think about hireling shepherds, they probably wouldn't die for the sheep. As a matter of fact, it reminded me of the story about the little boy and the little girl. The little girl says to the little boy, do you love me? The little boy says, yeah, I do. Little girl says, would you die for me? He doesn't have to think very long before he says, no, mine's an undying love. Well, the hirelings probably wouldn't die for the sheep. But a shepherd that owned the sheep, or a really loyal servant, he might do what the shepherds did back in the days of Jesus. At night, out in the field, he would make kind of a makeshift area to surround the sheep, sheepfold it would be called. Might take some pieces of branch and create kind of a area where the sheep had to be contained inside the broken up trees and branches and things. And of course there had to be an opening in that, and a good shepherd would lay down in that opening so that the sheep would have to try to get across him, or if a wild animal was trying to come in and get a sheep, they'd have to get through the shepherd. And so when Jesus in John 10:11 says, I am the good shepherd, that means he owns the sheep and is extremely loyal, servant to the owner of the sheep, which is God the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. Well, Jesus did one step more than just laying down in the sheepfold entrance. Because you see, not every night did a wild animal come through and eat the shepherd. But Jesus went to the cross of Calvary and died for us. He actually laid down his life for us. It's a wonderful illustration that perhaps we normally wouldn't be able to relate well to because we don't know a lot about sheep and shepherds. But Jesus clearly said, I am the good shepherd. And more than that, I lay down my life for the sheep. There's an interesting story in the Daily Bread a few years ago, and it's a story about a little girl who had caught 6 wild birds and was going to keep them in a cage by her house as pets. But, you know, a bird to stay healthy, particularly a wild bird, it needs to be able to fly and needs to be able to get the food that it requires. And while this girl wasn't depriving the birds of food or water, they weren't getting the exercise and they weren't getting the kind of food they needed, and one of the birds died. She went to her father and she said, Dad, I just don't know what to do. One of my birds has died. And the father said, well, honey, those are wild birds and perhaps they'd do far better if you just let them go. And so the little girl went back out to the cage and she released the remaining birds, and they flew away happily and healthy. And she came back and she told her father, she said, isn't that a little bit like Jesus? He died so that the rest of us could be free. Now, I realize there's a lot of holes in the theory here about the birds that don't parallel Jesus and what he did, but it is a good illustration to remind us that he laid down his life so that we could be free. And that's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a wonderful day.